By day, he's a mild-mannered attorney. By night, he's an even more mild-mannered, middle-aged suburban dad. By weekend, still mild-mannered. Mark, this is dumb. Why do you have me reading this?
Come on, man, just read it. I told you, this is the dramatic intro for my podcast. It's important.
Why do you have me doing it? We're not even that good of friends.
Well, you've got that voice for it. You can bring that gravitas that I'm looking for. Besides, I think this could really be a big opportunity for you. I mean, maybe you'll get discovered. Anyway, would you please just do this already?
Yeah, fine. But once a month.
Well, it might be twice a month.
Huh?
Well, we're still working it out. We're just starting up. It might be twice a month. But anyway, go ahead. We'll figure it out.
Yeah, whatever. Nobody's going to listen to this anyway.
All right, will you please just read what's on the paper? You're killing me here.
Okay. But once a month, when the moon reaches its highest point in the sky and the wild creatures call out in the night, he emerges from a private sanctuary in an undisclosed location outside of Little Rock, Arkansas, arrayed in his priestly vestments, carrying forth the good news that comic books and graphic novels aren't just for kids, that they aren't just masked and spandex superheroes, that storytelling in a graphic format can be so much more. He is the graphic novel apostle.
Intense. That was killer, right?
Yeah, whatever, man. You said Natalie made some pie?
Hello, and welcome back to Ep.3 of the Graphic Novel Apostle podcast. My name is Mark Ohrenberger, your host. I'm so glad you're back with us today. And before we get started, now in just a minute we will welcome in my friend Jared Lillard, who's here to talk about That Texas Blood, Volume 1 by Chris Condon with art by Jacob Phillips. And I am pumped to talk about this story. This is one that I really love. But just a few preliminaries before we get into it. First, for those of you who listened to our first two episodes, we're going to try and change up just a little bit. Some of the early feedback I've gotten is that maybe we've given more detail than was absolutely necessary for some of these podcasts when going through the story. It is against every fiber of my nature to cut back. I want to download every thought that's in my head about these things to you guys. But I think for a better listening experience, I'm going to try and be a little more summary in the story. And who knows, that'll maybe even leave some things for you guys to enjoy if you pick up these books and read them after. But with that, I do want to say we're going full spoilers here. If you don't want to have this story spoiled for you, That Texas Blood, Volume 1, I highly recommend that you read it. And come on back. We'll still be here when you're ready to pick back up. Next thing I want to say, too, is I've encouraged you guys at the beginning of these first couple episodes to send in your feedback, either to me on Gmail at graphicnovelapostle@gmail.com or on Instagram at graphicnovelapostle. I hope you'll continue to do that. For those of you who may have already sent in some feedback, just a little peek behind the curtain here. This is our third episode. We have not released any as of this recording here in late April. And so if I haven't read your email or something from your comment on Instagram yet, we'll have a time where we catch up with those from our first three episodes. But just know that it has more to do with our recording than not having an interest, because I really want to engage with some of your comments. Along those lines, man, send me your recommendations as well. I've got a list already of friends that I want to have on the podcast and books that I've picked out for them. Of course, all that's flexible and subject to change, but tell me what you're reading too. If there are good graphic novels that I've just overlooked, guys, I'd love to get your recommendations. Let me know that. Also, let me know what you guys want to hear, whether different kinds of stories or different aspects of the comic book world that you want us to talk about more. Let us know. Last thing, please do subscribe to our podcast wherever you download your podcasts. I'm told that rating the show or writing reviews also is good for us. I suppose it's better if those ratings are high, so I'd appreciate that. But please do that, and we'd love to build this thing and see what it can become. So far, I'm having a lot of fun. Next, I also want to say for our next episode, we're going to have my friend Crystal Hogg on here, and we are going to discuss a book called I Kill Giants, written by Joe Kelly with art by Ken Niimura. This is a very well-known graphic novel for people who engage with content in this space, and it's a really moving one, and I'm looking forward to talking about that. But with all that said, let's delay no further, and let's get into That Texas Blood, Volume 1. Jared, the voice of the Graphic Novel Apostle podcast.
Yeah.
Man, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Dude, I'm thrilled. And I got to tell you, when I had the idea for this podcast and I started just rattling things around in my brain about how we could do the intro, and I came up with this idea of doing kind of like a dumb little skit where somebody is having a hard time taking me seriously doing this, which as a grown man operating in a professional world most of the time, I could understand if you have a hard time taking my comic book podcast very seriously. Yeah. Anyway, when I was about to call you to ask you to do this, because when I wrote this thing, I had you in mind for two reasons. One, that deep bass voice of yours. But then also, secondly, I was like, man, if anyone can pull off the why on earth am I doing this thing, I said it's going to come natural from Jared.
Well, I'm not sure if that's a compliment or not, but I appreciate you thinking of me.
Hey, by the way, help me out with something here. I said your deep bass voice. Are you a bass or a baritone? And what's the difference?
When I was in high school, I was a bass, which is the second bass. There are two bass parts, two tenor parts, two alto parts, two soprano parts, and number two sings lower. So there's a bass 2 and then a bass 1 that would also be called baritone, and those guys go all over the place, up and down, typically not as low as the basses or the second basses. When I got to college, I had a couple of schools that wanted me to come sing like in their choir program, and they wanted me to be a baritone. So I don't know.
And did the baritone go lower?
No, they're higher.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Second bass or bass goes lower.
Okay.
So I'm probably more a bass today than I was when I was 20, though. My range has
That makes sense.
shrunk.
You ever listen to the band The National?
No.
Oh, dude. One of my all-time, like top 2 favorite bands.
The National?
The National.
How long have they been around?
Oh, man. Early aughts, they first started releasing music, and they became big in the indie rock scene in the mid-aughts.
Not a lot of good music released in the 2000s. So.
Oh, man, you just got to know where to look. You just got to know where to look. But anyway.
National, I'll make a note of that.
Please do. The lead singer of The National, Matt Berninger, I guess it is his name, has a voice that's pretty close to yours, and it's,
really?
Oh, man, it works so well with the way they do music.
Do they sing every song way down here? Because that's about where I am.
Yeah. But he's the lead singer. It's really cool. But I guess we're here to talk about comic books.
That's true. Enough about that.
So maybe we should do that. All right, so we are here to talk about That Texas Blood, Volume 1, written by Chris Condon with art by Jacob Phillips, who I'm going to tell you just right off the bat is my absolute favorite comic book artist, hands down, bar none. On the last episode of the podcast, we had Peyton on, and Peyton and I were talking about Volume 1 of a book called Criminal, and actually, if you... we've got issue 1 of Criminal over there on the wall.
I really enjoyed how you suggested that Peyton should try a career in crime and law enforcement at the same time.
It can be profitable.
Man, what a great opportunity.
I think so. I think he's missing out.
Some of the richest people in the world have done that.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
We'll talk to him about that later. Anyway, that one was written by Ed Brubaker, and the art was done by Sean Phillips. Sean Phillips is the dad of our artist today, Jacob Phillips. And I said on that episode that Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips are hands down the best comic book creating team in this whole industry, and I'll die on that hill. That's for sure.
You'll get no argument from me.
I guess not. We're going to talk about your background with comics in just a second. But this team of Chris Condon and Jacob Phillips are coming out hot. Really impressive stuff. And this book, That Texas Blood, is their first mainstream comic.
Can you tell me how old these people are?
No.
Okay. Like the Brubaker and Dad Phillips.
Sure.
Are they 65 or are they 45?
You know what? I don't know for sure. I would guess they're like in their 50s.
Okay. So these dudes here are relatively young.
Yeah, I think they're in their 20s.
Okay.
And
that's you, right?
Yeah. And we're talking to Travell just off mic here. Yeah. And Travell, man, I'm so happy we have you here for all these things. Bring a little bit of young life into this podcast today. At a mere 29, still wet behind the ears.
Definitely no youth on this side of the table.
Or over here. So getting into these books, man, these guys are just killing it right out the gate. And I told you earlier, I was fired up about talking about this story. As I read back through this, and I know about recency bias and all that kind of thing, but as I reread this, I guess it's probably my third time to read through the story. This is one of the best comics I've ever read. I'm just so psyched for this. So when I called you about doing this, honestly, I was a little bit nervous about placing the call. Of course, look, we've known each other for, 20 years. I know you're not going to scream at me for picking up the phone and calling you, but on our first episode, we had Chad Toppy on, and I asked him what he thought of the book, and he said, man, I'm easy to please. Some of our other friends might be harder to. And I don't know that he even knew you and I were going to be working together, but I was concerned maybe you fit the bill here. You were going to be like, why are you calling me about, no, I'm not going to do this.
No, I thought it was flattering that you called me, but I'm an entrepreneur at heart, and I just appreciate your passion and your chutzpah to get up and do this, and let's try something new, and I'm excited to help you. I hope it's wildly successful.
Oh, thanks so much, man. And look, I was thrilled with the reaction I got from you where you were like, yes.
Oh, yeah, totally in.
For sure.
Yeah.
And then you said, I think you said, all right, one condition, I get to be a guest.
That's absolutely right, man. It's absolutely right. I feel pretty famous right now.
Oh, you probably are. Once that graphic novel Apostle money starts rolling in, I think the residuals on these episodes.
For sure. Yeah.
Oh, man.
Early retirement.
Travell's over here counting his dollars.
Yeah, he is. Oh, yeah.
Oh, anyway, so you were in for it, but you were not familiar with comics at all before this.
No, not at all.
Not even as a kid?
Not even as a kid. Nope.
So when I handed you this book, and I sent you the little blurb that the publisher puts out for 2 books, this one, and at this point, I can't remember what the other was.
Wasn't it? I believe it was some kind of sci-fi, if I remember correctly.
It might have been. You know what? It was a book called The Closet by James Tinian IV and Gavin Fullerton, the artist. And we'll eventually get to that book on this podcast because it was a horror book.
Yeah, maybe that. It was something that I'm not a big fan of, whatever genre it was.
Fair enough. But you chose this one, and I was glad that you did. Frankly, I was rooting for you to pick this one.
All right, good.
Because I wanted to get to it early in the podcast. But when I handed this book to you, one of the things I wondered was had you any concept that books like this that are not superhero books were even being made in comics?
Absolutely none. When you handed me this book, I thought, what on earth is that? I thought we were reading a comic book. This looks like a textbook. It's not quite as thick as a textbook, but it's definitely not a little magazine that you would pick up at a comic store.
No, and
it's a book.
Yes. So what I gave you to prepare for this was a copy of the collected Volume 1. It's what we call a trade paperback, and it collects the first 6 issues of That Texas Blood. And so if you were like a monthly comic book reader, you would have walked into your comic book shop when this first started being published in single issue format in June of 2020. And for the next 6 months, you'd go in every month and you'd get the next chapter of the story.
So it's a monthly episode.
Yeah. Most comics are done that.
Issue, whatever.
That's right.
Yeah.
And most comics are done that way. Some are a little more than that. Sometimes they're, especially if it's an artist who's really meticulous, sometimes it's a longer period in between. Mm-hmm. But standard is 1 month. And then at the end of, usually the way these things are written these days is in a single story arc that might cover 4 to 6 issues. And it may be that the whole story that the creative team wants to tell, it would be like 15 kind of issues. Mm-hmm. And usually, though, they try to break that up into 3 acts. Mm-hmm. And along the way, they collect, say, the first act or the first story, and it will be published in a paperback format like that.
Okay.
This one is actually a little bit different, and I had forgotten this until we started preparing for the episode. But this one is a little bit different than a lot because you had this introductory issue in the first issue that had story-wise nothing to do with the issue.
I'm so glad that you've just said this because I was nervous about walking in here and going, man, I don't have any idea how the first 15 pages relate to the rest of the book.
Yeah.
All right, carry on. Thank you.
And and we'll talk about that in just a minute when we get into the story portion of the book. But and I thought that was a really cool way to set this up. But I want to tell you a little bit more about the That Texas Blood series overall. So it's called Volume 1, which usually suggests that there's a Volume 2, although sometimes that's more aspirational than it is real. But here we have 3 volumes of That Texas Blood that have been published already.
Okay.
They're all set in this fictitious county of Ambrose County, Texas, and they all follow this. They all stay in this main genre of And man, I had to look it up because I wasn't quite sure what to call the genre here. It feels like a Western, but it's a crime story. And so I'd seen it described as like a neo-Western crime. This first arc I saw described as a Western noir, which I thought was pretty fitting, at least for the issues 2 through 6 part of the story. But all of those issues all those volumes follow this sheriff, Joe Bob Coates, who is really a lovable character.
Yeah, he is.
And issue 1 of this first volume is really about introducing us to him and his world in Ambrose County, Texas. But the way it's set up as well, so volume 1 that we did today is set in basically the present day. And it's with our sheriff, Joe Bob, who is about 70. His birthday is in the very first issue. He turned 70. And we have a rural crime story. We go into volume 2, and it's Joe Bob again, except he's 30 years old. It's set in 1981, and it's all about a cult that came to Ambrose County, Texas in the early 80s. And then you get into volume 3, and it's set in 1992, and so now Joe Bob is like in his early 40s, and he's dealing with a serial killer. It's kind of neat. We see this early in the series anyway, where we're thinking about the span of Joe Bob's life and looking back on it and what wild things happened over the course of his career. But another important character throughout the series is Ambrose County, Texas itself. The idea is that Ambrose County is snake bit. It's a dark place where bad things happen. And
reminds me of, I think it was called Bloodline. Did you watch that? It had whatever the guy that played Coach Eric Taylor from Friday Night Lights. Dadgummit. I'm pretty sure it was called Bloodline. It's very similar. It's like every episode's, not this, right? Oh, he didn't have to kill that guy. Why did he kill that guy? Or what? It's snake bit, right? There's always something. And there was a family in this case.
cool.
In southern Florida, but it was a very similar, like just stuff going wrong all the time.
No, okay, that's cool. I want to tell you about one more thing before we get into this volume, and that is, as of this recording, Chris Condon and Jacob Phillips have just finished a separate 6-issue series that is not going to be like a numbered volume in That Texas Blood. It's called The Enfield Gang Massacre, and it is just a pure Western story. And it is set in Ambrose County, Texas in the 1870s.
Right? How about that?
Yeah, it is really cool. And it was neat the way it was done. Jacob Phillips' art is very like watercolor washed, and so it has a pulp feel from another era almost, which is really neat.
Now, are those 2 books series the only thing these guys have written, or are they?
So far, that's the only thing that they've done together.
Okay.
Chris Condon is working on another series that's coming out right now through Oni Comics that I'm collecting, and the first 2 issues have come out. There was an author who was popular back in the 90s named Barry Gifford. Wrote a bunch of crime novels, and he did one called Night People that Chris Condon is now adapting for the comic book format. And that one is cool. It's going to be 4 issues, and each issue is going to be with a different artist, so it'll have a different feel. And the first 2 that have so far come out, you're seeing stories that I think are happening in parallel, but we've yet to see how they come together, and that's going to be a ton of fun. But Jacob Phillips has also done some other interesting projects outside of their work as a collaboration. If you're familiar with the Criterion Collection movies, it's they try and pick some of the epic cinema type movies, and they get released that way. There was a movie from 1996 called Lone Star, which was a Western as well, that the Criterion Collection just released a new Blu-ray on. And they had Jacob Phillips do the cover for the Blu-ray collection, which was really neat. But the other thing, and to anyone who's listening to this podcast just a week ago, at least as of this recording, there is an outstanding podcast called Off Panel with an interviewer named David Harper. He just had Jacob Phillips on, and he talked all about these different projects, talked about the different techniques he'd used for his art through each of them, and it was a fascinating discussion. But one of the things they got into talking about was a project that Jacob is working on right now called Megalopolis. Later this year, Francis Ford Coppola is going to release a movie starring Adam Driver that is set in a, think like New York type big city after some kind of disaster. And it's, I guess, going to be a focus on the characters in the wake of this disaster. One being the mayor of the city, another being someone who wants to see some renewal. But alongside the movie release, there's going to be an original graphic novel that's published.
How about that?
And it's not going to come out as a single comic book series, as I understand it. It'll be just a single, here's the book like you have in front of you. Yeah. And those are called an OGN, or original graphic novel. So I think that's crazy.
Original gangster novel?
Original graphic novel. That's a lot of background about our creators, but I'll tell you what, I think they are worth it to talk about.
Do they often collaborate with a mainstay partner, kind of like a golfer and a caddy, or do they just do?
So different comic book creators do this all different ways. If you are writing at Marvel or DC, I think you have some of the writers have greater say in who they work with, and some probably less. But out here in independent comics,
these dudes are just trying to get gigs. So a musician, right? They're just trying to get another job.
Some of them are, but then others figure out like, hey, we really work together. My writing and your illustrative storytelling really fit well together, and so you do see in indie comics a lot of pairings. And you think about this too, that writers can work a lot faster than the artists can because of the time it takes to what I could write in a page versus what you could draw the page and do it in a publishable quality.
Boy, that's true.
So you see some like prolific writers who have several different artist pairings that they work in. All right, so let's talk now about our story. And as we talk about issue 1, let me give this suicide warning here at the very beginning. That's not going to be true for anything that goes on in issues 2 through 6, but there is a suicide that takes place in this issue. And for those people that may be difficult to listen to, I just want to give you that heads up. All right, so issue 1 is called The Casserole Dish, which doesn't sound like the makings of just a memorable crime story, but I think it is.
Yeah.
So we get here in this episode, our introduction to Sheriff Joe Bob Coates. And man, I'm hoping maybe Jared, I was trying to think all week of what the name of that literary device is where you tell a story that seems totally disconnected from everything else that comes after, but it introduces you to the idea of who is this person? What is this place? But it has nothing to do really story-wise with the rest. Do you have any idea?
I am not a lot of help on literary devices.
Well, hey, if we got any English teachers or professors out there, write in, let us know.
Yeah.
I tried to Google that around and I couldn't figure it out, but issue 1 is really just like this introductory vignette. I remembered this book I read years ago by John Sanford. It was a novel that was in his Prey, P-R-E-Y series, and it had something like this where it introduced Joe Pike, one of the main characters, with this aside about him being out in the wilderness. It had nothing to do with the story, but it was like, okay, I got a sense of the man now. And with this man, Joe Bob, he reminded me a lot of Tommy Lee Jones's character in No Country for Old Men. Did you ever see that movie?
Man, I'm not sure I did.
Oh, man, Coen Brothers movie from the mid-2000s. Had Josh Brolin in it, and, of course, Tommy Lee Jones.
I can definitely see this guy being Tommy Lee Jones or vice versa. Kind of that, I can almost hear his gravelly, tired law enforcement voice,
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And in No Country for Old Men, Tommy Lee Jones's character was a reflection on the world changing, and maybe not for the better. It's a bleak outlook on modern society. And with Joe Bob, we're getting some of that, but I think he seems more resigned. There's this point in No Country for Old Men where Tommy Lee Jones is sitting and he's in a diner talking to the sheriff of El Paso, and they're reflecting on all these crimes that have taken place in the movie. And Tommy Lee Jones just says, signs and wonders, when he's talking about how the world has changed. And the refrain I think we'd get from Joe Bob is probably just, well.
Yeah.
Because it's part of his speaking device,
several times.
Right? And that immediately resonated with me when I got to that sort of verbal tick of his. My grandfather, who was a farmer in rural southern Indiana, used to speak like that. When, you'd tell him something and, you didn't know what reaction you were going to get from him, but he'd just say, well.
Yeah. And
then move on. There might not be anything that followed. And I've kind of picked up doing that a little bit myself. I've had people point that out to me. And
I think that as you get older, you learn that sometimes the best the best thing to do in a situation is just to take a little break, even if it's just a couple of seconds, to say something like, well, just give me a second to gather my thoughts, or maybe calm down a little bit, or whatever.
Well, and even if he says nothing beyond that, it's sort of like, I accept what you've just said.
Yeah.
It's not my obligation in life to respond to it.
I hear Joe Bob's is like, well, it's slow and southern.
Right.
Well,
right. So in the very opening pages of this book, we're getting these images from inside Joe Bob's house, and we see that, like, you know, he's got old newspaper clippings on the wall, old pictures of him with other law enforcement people. You can tell that his career has really defined who he is, and it's been important and it's been meaningful to him. And, you know, he's 70 now. This is a late point in his life.
Isn't he older than that, Mark? Doesn't he? Oh, no, that's his wife saying she's been 70 for 5 years.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah, so the first time we actually see Joe Bob, he is laying in bed, laying on his back, awake, you know, reflecting on the fact that he's turning 70. And his wife is laying there next to him with her hair in curlers.
Yeah.
Which really just, I don't know, that felt like something from another time to see.
You're right. Yeah, you're right.
Laying like that. Something I wanted to point out, when we're seeing those newspaper clippings and things in the early pages, one of those in the middle of the page that you've got in front of you right now is about a cult. And that's it. That's what happens in volume 2.
I knew where you were going with that.
Yeah, for sure, which was really cool.
Yeah.
But over the course of this whole issue, what we get is really just the feel of this small town. You get these scenes where Joe Bob is talking to his wife over the police radio, and his like dispatcher / secretary is calling him on his cell. Yeah, and she's fussing at him for using the police radio for this business, and you get the feeling like, yeah, these people have just been in this cycle that they're doing for 100 years. Later, Joe Bob is doing a roadside speed trap stakeout kind of thing, and falls asleep during it. He gets called out to kill a rattlesnake in somebody's yard. So you're given the impression early on that the type of crime Joe Bob is dealing with is like sleepy town kind of crime. We're not expecting something big.
It definitely feels like a sleepy little town.
Right.
Yeah.
But we're going to see there's a lot of weight to the history of this town.
Something going on there.
Yeah, and there's something in the water, right? Yeah. One of the things that we get early on is, because it's Joe Bob's 70th birthday, his wife is going to invite a bunch of people over to the house, and they're going to cook up a storm, and she wants him to get her casserole
needs
dish.
That darn casserole dish.
She said, get my casserole dish back. I need it for the party tonight. And he's supposed to go to a woman's house named Ruth and get it back. Yeah. And this is where we start to get introduced to a little bit of the darker side, but it still feels very normal type crime, in that he goes out to Ruth's house, and she won't come to the door, and you can hear her fighting with her husband Ray inside. And we get.
I wasn't sure if they were married.
I don't know. They live
even
together.
know? Yeah, okay.
But either way, you know, this is a couple that is together, and you can tell right away this is a domestic violence type situation. And the Joe Bob, when he's basically turned away from the door, and Ruth says, I'll have Ray bring the casserole dish into town later, because she didn't want to show herself. Joe Bob is leaving, and he finds an empty beer can out in the yard, and he knows, oh man, this is not good. There's also this little interlude right in the middle of this first issue that I think tells us a lot about who Joe Bob is as well. And this is the part, the art is actually even has a different sort of feel to it, almost an eerie kind of feel, where he's sitting around a campfire and he's talking to a guy named Sam. And you can see he's a little bit of a younger man at this point in time when he's talking to Sam. Sam is the sheriff who preceded him. And Sam starts telling him this story about Sam's own brother from when he was a kid, and how he had this pet deer and it seems like it's going to be a fun and funny little story. And then it turns dark pretty fast.
It does.
And following that, Joe Bob starts to see the ghost of the brother. And then Sam says something like, you should know that he was never right after this little story I've just told, because you were the one who had to shoot him after he shot me in the chest. And there's a page turn, and you get this like apparition of Sam, and now he's still in his police uniform, but like he's been gut shot with a shotgun, and he is just a mess. And we discover that's when Joe Bob has fallen asleep in his patrol car while he's on duty, but it's a nightmare he's having. But I think it's important to talk about that, because this is a theme that runs throughout That Texas Blood, and that is the past is never that far behind. And there are echoes of it that you're seeing all the time. But Joe Bob, he startles himself awake from this nightmare, and the next thing is this just beautiful red Texas sky. It's gorgeous, and he gets on the radio and he's commenting to his wife about just like how pretty it is. The last thing we see in this issue is all of a sudden a vehicle goes by and Joe Bob says it's Ray, and he's going 120 miles an hour.
The Bronco, a police chase with a Bronco.
That seems relevant these days. So Ray pulls over when Joe Bob, gets behind him and starts chasing him. And for folks, this is where we get to the suicide portion. Joe Bob pulls Ray over and he gets he's just sauntering up to the car. And he looks in and Ray is covered in blood already. I'm going to presume that's Ruth's blood.
That is the presumption I made as well.
And he's got a gun, and Ray just tips his head back. He puts the gun under his chin, and then we have this big wide-angle shot of Joe Bob standing with his gun drawn outside of the Bronco, and we just hear kablam in big bang pow type lettering that really is effective in telling us, okay, here's what happened, without having to show. But then the next thing we see is Joe Bob looks in the vehicle and he discovers his casserole dish, and it's just covered in blood.
Mm-hmm.
And welcome to Ambrose County, and welcome to That Texas Blood.
Yeah, it got pretty dark in a hurry for me.
In a hurry.
I'm reading a comic book. Like, in my mind, we're talking about, I don't know, superheroes or something that's like nice and cheery for kids, and then all of a sudden you got pretty dark stuff.
It is. And someone asked me this question recently when I was telling them about the podcast. They were like, Mark, it seems like a lot of comic books these days are maybe not as kid-friendly. And I should say this. I would say most of the books that we're going to cover here on the podcast are either you would give them a PG-13 or an R rating.
Mm-hmm.
I think they usually get designated as like M for mature. But, they're not written for kids.
Right.
That's for sure.
Right.
And anymore, even the superhero comics are more at a PG-13 level than I still have that notion sometimes of like little kids grabbing a comic book and folding it up, putting it in their back pocket and riding off on their bicycle. And there are some of those comics being produced, but not a lot.
Yeah, but kids aren't doing that.
No, at least not in the
phone in their pocket.
Well, and at least not in the single issue kind of thing. Manga, of course, is big with kids, the Japanese comic style, but then also graphic novels that are written specifically for kids. Did any of your kids read Dogman?
I don't remember Dogman. There was one called Diary of a Wimpy Kid.
Yes.
That was probably similar. It was more words than this, obviously, but it was still pretty graphic as far as having illustrations.
Yeah, that's right. That was a generation before what Dogman is all the rage now. But
my kids are Travell's age. He knows what I'm talking about. That's not true. My oldest is 22. He's graduating from college next Saturday, Mark.
Next Saturday?
Yeah.
Holy cow.
Mm-hmm.
Congratulations.
1 week from right now.
Congratulations to Hunter. That is hard to believe.
Pretty wild, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yep.
And you and I are contemporaries. You're 1 year older than me. And the idea to me, Garrett is 9. Yeah. The idea to me that my peers have kids graduating from college is like too much.
Well, I just turned 45.
Okay, I'm 43.
Okay. Do you remember Matt Smeltzer?
Yes.
Matt and I roomed together for 2 or 3 or 4 semesters.
Yep.
He's got like a 4-year-old. Oh, man.
Dude, I couldn't set the clock back to 4, even though Garrett's just 9.
No, I'm good we started early, but it's worked out.
Good for you guys.
Very early, right?
Yeah. Hey, by the way, I should say this to our listeners. I mentioned Garrett just a second ago. In episode number 1, Garrett wanted to get on the microphone and introduce himself, but he insisted on being introduced as Aaron, spelled with 1 A, instead of Garrett, because he didn't want his real name to be disclosed.
I like it.
I'm blowing the lid off of that, and I actually know that at some point in the middle of episode 1, we referenced Garrett anyway. We're going to bring him back.
I want Garrett to do an episode.
Oh, he's going.
After the display that I just witnessed a minute ago where he explained that a graphic novel is a collection of 5 or 6 comic books, and it's usually... there needs to be a Garrett episode.
Well,
for sure.
For sure.
That kid has always been the most interesting kid that I've ever been around. That's the honest truth.
Well, if you'd like him for an afternoon or the rest of the weekend,
Nope, youngest is 16. We're past 9.
Well, fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Yeah, we're going to have him on, but we're going to have him on for a full episode, and we're going to talk about some of those kids-type comics.
Yeah.
But one of the other things, we'll probably have him on before that even, just to explain himself, because I have gotten to the bottom of the story of why he wanted to be known as Aaron and not Garrett. And I'm not going to tell you here, because he's going to have to tell you in his own words.
All right. That's good stuff.
Let's move on.
Sure, let's do.
All right. I know Travell is no longer believing me about being a little more summary on some of this, but issue 1 is a self-contained universe.
That's true, yeah.
Issues 2
we're talking about 2 books. We're talking about 2 books.
Yeah, issues 2 through 6 make up a whole separate story that takes place in the immediate aftermath of issue 1, because at some point there's a conversation that Joe Bob has with a bartender in town, and the bartender mentions something about, look, I don't have any information for you about what happened with Ray. Mm-hmm. And so we know this has just occurred.
Yeah, I didn't feel like there was any big time hop when I was reading through this. It just felt disconnected.
Yeah.
And I flipped back and forth. We hadn't talked much about this. This is my first graphic novel to read, and I didn't realize that you had to read the pictures. So I did a lot of flipping back and forth, and then I'd go back to this volume 1 or whatever and look for names. Wait a minute, where'd Tracy come from? Or where'd Travis come? Or Randy? Or there's all these people, and I was like, what happened to Ruth? And then I finally think I figured out that, maybe they're not the same people.
Yeah.
Except for Joe Bob.
So tell me about what you just said about not realizing you had to read the pictures, because Peyton said something very similar on our last episode.
Yeah.
And I was surprised by that when he said it.
There are not very many words in here.
It's true.
And so it took me a few pages to figure out that between this one word bubble and the next one, 2 pages later, there's a lot of stuff that had happened, because what I was reading was like not directly related to what I just read.
Yeah, there's a lot of story that's being told.
Yeah, for sure. And like I said just now, this is the first time I've ever read one of these. I just want to be clear about one thing. I don't read.
Okay.
I don't, besides the fact that when you handed me this, I thought, man, that's an actual book. That was the first thing I thought. The second thing I thought was, I'm not sure, do you think I could cancel being on the podcast? Because I don't know if I want to read that. That's quite a commitment for me. Now, what I didn't realize is there's only about 16 words on every page, and so it went very quickly.
Yeah.
But I say that to say this. I'm thinking it's a book, right? I'm picking it up. There's just going to be a bunch of words in here.
Yep.
There's not. This is a bunch of pictures.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it took me a few minutes to figure out that there was a lot of story in those.
Yeah, and some comic writers do more telling than letting the artist just show.
Oh, yeah.
And some do a lot less. There are different comics that are sometimes referred to as like silent issues, where you might only have sound effects on
Kablam
through the whole thing, but there is a story, and you don't need a word, and it can still be extraordinarily powerful.
Sure.
But
it's a little bit like reading a book anyway, because it's just you're imagining the opposite. When you read a book, one of the reasons I'm just a real simple guy. Like if I want to consume a story, I want to consume it where I can see it.
Okay.
When you read a book, there's no video or picture. There's no sound. It's like my wife's a big reader. She likes it because she can imagine all these things, and it takes you to this creative place. So you're just doing it in the opposite here. You're seeing the pictures, which in a traditional book you would imagine, and you're imagining the words.
Good point. Right? Yeah, the narrative is still taking place, but it's generated in your own mind by those visual inputs. I love that. So once you figured out that's how you had to approach this, did you enjoy that? What did you think of that experience?
Just being as candid as I possibly can.
That's what I
thought, this is weird.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's just different.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm 45 and I haven't read many books, but the books that I read were all words, right? So yeah, it's just different. And you get in this, I'm just flipping pages and I go right back to the words. Yeah. Okay. He said this. And then I just go. Now I got to backtrack a couple pages because I feel like I missed something. Wait, who's this person? Why is he in bed with her? So it's still, it was odd, right? And it took me quite a while to get in the routine of reading through those pictures, if you will.
Yeah. That's so interesting to me because when I had this very intense fling with comic books when I was a kid,
Okay.
I was about 11 years old, 10 or 11 years old. And actually,
really like how you described that. Very intense, steamy fling.
it was
comic books.
It was
when
hot.
I was 11. Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt. What's crazy, like right now on Disney Plus, the X-Men 97 cartoon is coming out. So when we were kids, do you remember X-Men having a cartoon on Fox?
I don't remember being on Fox, but I'll take your word for it.
It was, thanks.
Yeah, I'm certain you do.
I do.
Yeah.
I didn't know who the X-Men were when that show came out, and that was in 1992. And so this X-Men 97 they're doing on Disney Plus right now is that 1992 cartoon ran for 5 years, and it ended in 97.
Okay.
And so the idea is we're going back to revisit the X-Men of the 90s.
Okay.
And we're going to do the same, following the same format of those early cartoons.
You seen the way people are dressing lately? The 90s are coming back all the way around, man.
It's true.
It's our time to shine.
It's true. Do you have any of those flare bottom jeans or anything like that?
Absolutely not. No. No, you see what I'm wearing today? It looks like I might be on the golf course 10 minutes from now. That's pretty much what I have.
I assumed you probably would be, and I can't say I've ever seen you dressed any other way.
No, that's pretty much what I have. And my family, the women particularly, give me a hard time about it a lot. I'm like, look, this is what I wear. I don't know. Why do you want me to be something else?
Jared, I want you to be you.
I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Very kind.
Characters welcome, like you would say. All characters welcome here. But so when that when that cartoon came out in 1992, I was 11 years old.
You were 11. Was that what kicked off your...
Yes.
Okay.
So I had a newspaper route, and man,
How about that?
the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, which is the general circulation newspaper here in Arkansas, I guess they have a paper Sunday edition now,
so.
but everything else it's digital now. If you're a subscriber, I think they give you an iPad.
They do or did at one point.
Yeah, at one point they did. So this, I don't know if like Garrett, I don't know if he would even know what I was talking about. I told him I had a newspaper route, but I'd go out, I'd ride my bicycle every day after middle school, and I'd deliver 30 newspapers all around this neighborhood. And so I'd make about $30 a week. That ended up being about my take home. And that...
You were already contributing to a 401k at that point, I presume.
that
You had a Roth set up.
Well, Jared, we hadn't mentioned before that you're a CPA. You had not entered my life yet at this point.
True. So you didn't have good advice.
No, in fact, well, I was investing heavily in comic books.
I got you.
Yeah.
Are any of them on the wall around here?
No,
Okay.
in fact,
These are all adult purchases.
these, yes,
Okay.
all of the comic books on the wall in my house
It's
are things I bought.
It's quite the array.
Are things I bought in my.
And I see the grades on them. That's not the grade of the book. It's like the story. That's the physical grade of the book, correct?
Yeah, I want to talk about that. I want to finish my story
let's
first.
go for it.
About
Sorry.
being 11. No, that's cool. So this cartoon just captured my imagination.
Yeah.
Like seeing these characters, especially the character Juggernaut was one of the bad guys on there. And he was just like, I was a professional wrestling kid to begin with. And as you know, I'm a professional wrestling grown up too. But I was always, the biggest bodies, the ultimate warrior, that kind of thing. And I was just like, those physiques are amazing. And then I realized, this is being done on the comic book page too. And so I saw that cartoon, and then I started going to a comic book shop with a friend of mine, and we just got intense into collecting. It's funny, we were collecting comic books Marvel was producing that were adapting the cartoon. What's crazy about that, though, that I didn't realize until I was an adult, is that the cartoon was adapting stories from the X-Men comics from like the 70s and 80s.
Oh, yeah.
Except they would be these big, intense, drawn-out stories that happen over months, and they'd reduce it to a 22-minute cartoon. And then they would reduce that to a 20-page comic book that's geared at children. But my perception back then was that people didn't buy comic books to read them. I thought, I don't know, this is just my kid perception, was like, people buy comic books to look
at the pictures.
Captain America punching a Nazi right in the face. And the way my brain is wired, I was always going to be in a career where I was working in words. And I think of myself as being skilled as a writer, at least in a technical sense, maybe not in a creative sense. But something about looking at those pictures spoke to me. And then when I got in, I was like, oh, people do read these stories, and they're good. That like blew me away.
Yeah.
So to hear you talk about being inclined to just read the words and almost pass over the pictures, I'm like, that's the polar opposite of what my brain just assumed was how it worked.
I would have been the polar opposite of that at 11.
Okay.
I would have picked it up and looked at the pictures.
Yeah. Let's pivot just a second. You asked about
Oh, yeah.
this thing that I have sitting in front of me. So we've talked about the individual comic books. And actually, in the trade paperback that you have, and I'm not asking you to do this now, but when you open to the copyright page that has some of the credits and stuff, and there's little text in the bottom, a little paragraph that usually says, first printing, published whatever date, and then beneath it, it'll say, originally published in single magazine form as that Texas Blood 1 through 6. And a lot of times that'll say it on the back cover as well.
See it.
So that tells you what you're looking at.
Okay.
But what I have here is this plastic encasement with a number 9.8 on the top. You see this with sports cards.
I was going to say, it just looks like a giant baseball card case.
Yeah.
I was a baseball card kid.
Okay, cool. And people do this with baseball cards too, like these same companies.
I got a few that are in.
Oh, do you really?
Like that.
Yeah, so you send them off to either CGC or CBCS, are really the big two in the comic book industry. So the one I'm looking at here is That Texas Blood number 1, and it's from CBCS. I had picked up this copy of That Texas Blood number 1 at a comic book store, and I was at Planet Comic Con in Kansas City just a few months ago, actually.
You told me about that.
Yeah, and CBCS had some representatives there, and so I took this copy of That Texas Blood, which I thought was in good shape. I handed it to them, and I said, please take this. So they take it back to their warehouse or whatever.
You just had this, like, sitting at the house.
Yes.
Okay. You took it with you.
Took it with me.
You didn't buy it at the show.
No.
Okay.
Nope. I intentionally brought it because I wanted them to give this to CBCS, and I wanted to save the shipping cost. Yeah.
Good for you.
And
it was going to be a good grade.
Yeah.
You did.
I did. And so it came back as a 9.8. This is a 10-point scale, and seeing a 10 or a 9.9 is like seeing a unicorn.
Okay.
And so 9.8 really is the standard of like you got a mint condition comic book or whatever, close enough to a mint condition.
Yeah.
And so you see this one's got a blue label on the top, and that one over there on the wall that's got a yellow label. That's another one that I took to that convention. I bought that one, and that's a copy of Criminal issue 2, which is from what Peyton and I talked about last episode. I bought that in a back issue bin in a comic book shop, and when I got home and I was like putting it in its fancy plastic bag with a cardboard to protect it, when I was doing that, I noticed, oh, this has Ed Brubaker's signature on the bottom of it.
That does?
Yes.
No way.
I didn't notice it when I bought it. I didn't notice it at the comic book store. People didn't notice it. They sold it to me for $3.
Oh, wow.
And once I discovered that, of course, I didn't see Ed Brubaker sign this. They have handwriting experts. And so you take it to the CBCS people, you give it to them, they take it off to their handwriting experts who compare it to Ed Brubaker's signature. And it came back in a 9.4. And you see it's got that yellow label on the top. And that means that they've authenticated the signature.
Wow. Yeah. So you bought something for $3 that's worth how much?
Hard to tell. I don't know. Independent comics don't tend to have the same kind of resale value that like Marvel and DC type comics do that are bigger.
Yeah.
Although one of the things we talked about is with Peyton is Amazon Prime is making a series.
So, right?
Yeah. And so who knows? Maybe that'll be worth something.
I'm waiting until the end of this episode where you tell me they're making a show about my book here.
Hey, I would love to see that Texas Blood on film. I would love to. For now, I would recommend that you watch No Country for Old Men.
Yeah.
Which is a great Coen Brothers movie. But even then, though, like even if that book becomes worth, I don't know, $100 or whatever when that show is released, I have no intention of selling it. I want to have it hanging on my wall.
So it's really worth nothing.
Well, it's
worth a lot to you.
That's what it is.
You walk in the room.
That's what it is. It's worth a lot to me.
Like my Masters flag.
There you go. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. When did you go to the Masters?
2019.
Cool.
Yeah. Cool. Went to a practice round.
Making plans already to try and go back?
Making plans every year to go back. It's the greatest place on earth.
So what do you think? Should we talk about issues 2 through 6?
I feel like we're far enough in at this point that we probably should.
Okay, good. Welcome to the next episode of the Novel Apostle Podcast. Maybe this could be a two-parter, to be continued. We'll go through this a lot quicker, but what I think is fascinating about this 5-issue story in issues 2 through 6 is Joe Bob is no longer our point of view character. This whole second story is told through the point of view of Randy Terrell, who we didn't even meet in the
That's
first
correct.
episode.
I've spent some time flipping through the first 15 pages looking for Randy.
Yeah.
Didn't work out.
Yeah, because he wasn't there.
He wasn't there.
But he is here. We start off with Joe Bob. It's early in the morning. He's...
The curlers again.
Yeah, that's right. We see Martha, his wife, in her curlers. It's way early in the morning. He gets called out to a crime scene out in the middle of the desert. And there's just a body laying there. And Joe Bob says, yeah, I recognize him. And, of course, that brings us back to our small town thing.
Mm-hmm.
And he knows exactly who this guy is.
So at first, I thought this was Ray.
That was what I...
And I was confused. I was like, wait a minute. Of course he knows who it is. He was there. Like, why is he out in the middle of a field? Why, he was in the truck. I was really confused.
I did the exact same thing. I
Makes
felt,
me feel better.
why would Ray's body be laying here on the side of the road?
Yeah.
But it's not.
No, it's not somebody else.
We're going to learn in just a second. That's Travis Terrell, a local small-time criminal. And
Ne'er-do-well.
Lifelong ne'er-do-well. Yeah, that's exactly right. And by the way, so his brother is Randy. He is Travis. It's set in this West Texas kind of town. I do wonder if Chris Condon did that intentionally.
Maybe.
But anyway, we meet Randy Terrell, though. He lives in Los Angeles. He's a writer. And he's in bed. He gets this early morning phone call. And
hey, wait, you got to go back and do the Randy Travis thing again. I was trying so hard to think of a clever line from a Randy Travis song, and it just couldn't. I didn't know you were going to go there.
Have you come up with one?
I feel like it's going to be something about digging up bones.
Ooh, okay. And I noticed this thing that Randy is one brother, and the other brother is Travis. And you can't, West Texas, you can't help but think, hey, man, Randy Travis?
That's true. Maybe these guys are digging up some bones.
Oh, snap. Well done. In fact, maybe we should just call it right here. We've peaked.
We've peaked.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in to the Graphic Novel Apostle.
It was the 2-take intro skit.
Yeah.
2 takes.
We did
Done.
it, too. Yeah, not bad.
Okay, anyway. So we got Randy. Are we to Randy in the hotel or wherever he is?
He's in his apartment in Los Angeles.
Oh, okay.
And
he's gone far away. He's not a big fan of Ambrose County.
In fact, we learned pretty quickly that getting away from Ambrose was his lifeline.
Yeah.
And, of course, we're going to learn as the gravity of Ambrose County pulls him back into a life that he thought he escaped, oh, man. You ever watch the show Justified?
No, I haven't.
It's set in Harlan County, Texas. And I think it's an old song. Brad Paisley did a very good version of it. And there have been others that I've heard where they say you never get out of Harlan alive. And you never get out of Ambrose County alive.
Just like the show I was telling you about, Bloodline, same deal. Somebody's going to get a DUI, somebody's going to go to jail, somebody's going to murder someone or get murdered, cheat. That's just, anyway. I would leave too, right?
Yeah.
Randy tried to do the right thing.
That's right.
Bless his heart.
And before we move on, I can't just go on living like this. Did I say Harlan, Kansas? Because it's Harlan, Kentucky.
No.
Okay.
No, you said Texas.
Oh, it's Harlan, Kentucky.
Well, I'm glad we cleared that up.
I am too. Yeah. I would have had to bring you back here to my house, bring your bell back,
This is nice. Donuts.
Hey, man, I aim to please.
Yeah.
Anyway, he's having this, he learns his brother is dead. He starts packing up. You can tell this is dread for him.
Yeah, he doesn't want to go.
And he starts telling his girlfriend who lives with him that you can't come. And she doesn't understand. She's I love you. I want to support you. And he's trying to explain to her, you can't go to a place like Ambrose County, Texas. And she says, I almost lived in Texas one time. And he tells her, I wrote down this line, Austin isn't exactly where I'm going, honey. It's a different country, a different world, different rules. And anyway, you ain't got that Texas blood.
Oh, yeah, it was a good one.
Yeah, it worked in the title.
Yeah, sure did.
But when she makes a comment, I think Chris Condon probably wrote this a little tongue-in-cheek because we have the girlfriend making a comment like, ooh, dramatic much to him. But he's trying to say, no, this is another world we're going to.
You ever driven through Texas?
Oh, sure.
So Shelby and I drove from here to ultimately to El Paso last year. El Paso is beautiful, by the way. You mentioned it earlier. I love El Paso. First time I'd ever been there.
Is that right?
I loved it. It's incredible.
I assume you were smuggling drugs out of Juarez?
That's absolutely what we were doing.
Okay.
Yeah. We drove our biggest car.
Oh, good.
Nice, yeah.
Good.
Anyway.
Shelby's a rough-looking character. I would have taken Avery.
I let Shelby drive. She's a lot smillier than me.
Okay.
So if we get pulled over, we're good. There's a lot of space in Texas. It's huge, right? I'd imagine this like a West Texas. It's deserty. It's flat.
Mhm.
There's not another gas station for 180 miles, right?
Yeah.
This is, or to borrow from another movie, Radiator Springs. This is, except Radiator Springs is a lot friendlier and nicer. But
Wait, is this from the movie Cars?
yeah, right. You just remember it's a small town out in the middle of nowhere.
Sure.
I imagine this Ambrose County, this is almost like they're literally on a different planet.
Yeah, and it's a planet where a body can disappear.
Yeah, pretty quickly.
For sure. Randy gets back to Ambrose County where he does not want to be. And we can tell right away from some of his early interactions with people, like at a hotel, at a diner. Ambrose County is not exactly throwing its arms open to welcome Randy Terrell back to town.
No, he's got some history there. You see that pretty quickly.
And our Sheriff Joe Bob comes into this diner where he's trying to eat lunch and picks him up and says, you know, we got some things that we need to talk about. And it's clear right away, too. There's also some history between Joe Bob and Randy, and probably some history with Travis, too. These are, you got the forever and a day sheriff, and you've got the kids who grew up in this town who were, you put it right, ne'er-do-wells.
Yeah, Ozark.
Yeah.
You watch Ozark?
Sure.
This is
didn't
Ruth.
finish it, but yeah.
This is Ruth and her family.
Good.
Right?
Yes.
Can't remember their name, but that's what the Terrell family is.
Sure. We get back to the sheriff's station, and we have this little meeting where there's a sit-down between Joe Bob and Randy. And Randy's saying, what is this all about? Like, why are you acting so, this is such a big deal? I'm just coming back here to set the family affairs in order, which we're going to learn is mostly like taking care of the family house that's now empty and abandoned.
Yeah, abandoned.
But that's when, although we knew it the whole time, Randy did not know his brother was murdered.
Yeah, right.
And Joe Bob lays it on him. And we've got this narrative outro on the last page of issue 2 that says, and like that, like the flicking of a fingernail on a match head, the flame igniting, encircling, encompassing, devouring whole, it came rushing back. Every dirty deed, every dark secret, every whisper of every name he'd ever wronged. They hung in the air like now like a fog, too thick to see, heavy like lead. Clarity. It became clear, all right, like crystal. There was no escaping. There never was. There never was. I love things that are told in a starting and ending place that are very similar, or you get like the palindrome idea where something is the same forward as it is backwards. This is the end of issue 2. The end of issue 6 has eerily similar ideas that are presented with its language. And actually, there were just a handful of quotes from this whole thing that I copied down, but that's one of them. And I didn't really make that connection until rereading that just now. And there's some other things that are done visually that I'll point out to you along the way too, where you get sort of like the upside and the downside of something that happens in the story. And so we go into issue 3 and we meet Sarah. Sarah is a waitress who we'd just seen in the background in the diner earlier. And we discover that Sarah and Randy have a history. They were in love at one point. But we also learned that Sarah later had a history with Randy's brother Travis.
Yeah, that's a bad deal.
And also with a guy named Teddy Kuttner, who is going to be a villain that we'll meet here in a second. Sarah has a broken nose, and Randy's trying to figure out what's this all about. And Sarah's explaining to him that I have this broken nose from Teddy Kuttner, and he gave it to me one time when he was drunk, and we were being flirty, but he got to thinking about Sarah being with Travis, the brother, and it just upset him so much that he hit her. And so we immediately start to suspect, or Randy does start to suspect Kuttner as the person who murdered his brother. And frankly, Randy already knows who Kuttner is too, and knows this is a figure involved in crime. You said you didn't watch the show Justified, and man, if I could give you any recommendation of a television show to watch, oh, it's so stinking
The
good.
one, okay.
But early on in Justified, when Raylan Givens, the character played by Timothy Oliphant, who had moved off to Miami and thought he'd escaped Kentucky, finds himself right back in his hometown of Heartland, Kentucky, and he has an interaction with a woman named Ava Crowder, who's an important character in that show, one of the main characters. And she has just killed her husband who had abused her. And they have this conversation where Ava Crowder is telling Timothy Oliphant's character, I always dreamed that you were going to take me out of this place and that someday I'd escape and it was going to be through you. A very similar idea. Yeah, Sarah is saying, look, I loved you and you escaped and I wish I had with you too. And that's something she'll come back to as well.
Whoops, we ended up in bed together.
Yes. And of course, they did end up in bed together.
Yeah.
But Randy wakes up alone.
Mm-hmm.
He wakes up the next morning. He gets in the shower. He sees a note, says always and forever or something like that. But Sarah slipped out in the night. But Randy gets out of his shower, comes back into his room. And this is the kind of thing we see in good crime movies from time to time. There's a cowboy sitting in the seat in his hotel room, and he's got a gun. And Randy doesn't freak out. He knows this guy. He calls him Fred. Turns out that's his name. And he says, Kuttner wants to see you. And so, of course, these characters are inevitably on a path toward one another. And he leaves at gunpoint, and Fred takes Travis out there to meet Kuttner.
Not Travis, Randy.
Randy, excuse me.
Yeah.
Takes Randy out to meet Kuttner. It would be weird if you were hauling Travis around.
Travis is not doing a lot at this point.
That's right. So we have this first exchange with Kuttner, and Kuttner and his goons end up really beating Randy down.
Yeah.
So right in the middle of Kuttner and his guys beating Randy, Sheriff Joe Bob pulls in. And basically Sarah was his guardian angel here. Sarah had tipped off Joe Bob that he'd been seen leaving with Fred. And so thankfully Joe Bob saves Randy, takes him away, and drops him off at his childhood home. And now Randy, for the first time, is in his childhood home, and he starts to walk around. It's been trashed after the parents are long gone. Apparently Travis still lived there. And after his death, somebody has come in, tearing the place up. And we had learned from Kuttner, who had told Randy, look, your brother Travis owed me a bunch of money, so you now owe me a bunch of money. And we also learned that Randy used to be Travis's partner in crime. And so in Kuttner's mind, this is just. So the house has been torn up. Randy's walking around, and he's I love the way this is played out on the page. He is in his feelings. He's looking at old pictures of happier times of him and Travis as kids. But then he also looks, and he's basically left in a mostly empty house with a bottle of brown liquor and these old photos and everything else trashed. And we also know from elsewhere in the story that Randy had given up drinking. You know, he's sober at this point. Obviously, that had been a problem for him someplace else in his life. So
that's a sad scene to me.
Yeah.
I can't identify with that. Like, I had an idyllic childhood, but my parents were foster parents.
Yeah.
So I was by association, right? Not a parent.
Foster brothers and sisters.
And I was a little bit older when we started. I was like 10 or 11. But anyway, it just reminds me this scene with Randy in his old house of all the brokenness that's out there. Man, there are kids all the time that are growing up in houses like that where it's the home to me is like a happy feeling, right?
Yeah.
And it conjures up warm and fuzzy, good memories and good like feelings of love and joy. And for some people, that's not the case.
And here, certainly. And here, Randy is experiencing, because some of these pictures that he's seeing are really making him like, maybe wistful is not the right word, but he's touched by remembering like there were happy times.
Probably when he was innocent, right? Or before when he was young enough to be naive about what was going on. Because what I get out of this is it ain't just Travis that got the family into some stuff. I feel like it's a crime family. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, we don't really learn anything directly about the parents, but we don't get the sense that these were pillars of the community.
Yeah, like this idea that he can't get out. I don't think he would feel that way if it was a first generation problem.
Yeah. I'm also very thankful to have had a stable and very loving upbringing. But the minimal way that I could relate to this was back in about, I guess it was 2013. I grew up in Connecticut. I lived my whole adult life here in Arkansas. And so it's 1,400 miles. It's a once or twice a year thing to get home. But my parents were relocating to Indiana, and I knew that they were going to sell the home that I grew up in and lived in my whole life. And when I'd go home, I'd stay in my childhood bedroom and that kind of thing. And one of my uncles had passed. And so I flew home and we went to the funeral. But during that time, I realized this is probably the last time I'm going to be in this house. And so I took a moment to myself just to walk around the backyard, the tree that I used to like to climb and where the slide was at the swing set and the green turtle-shaped sandbox that we had. It was a really emotional moment.
I'm emotional just sitting here
I see.
thinking about my childhood home.
Yeah.
God, it was a great place. I was talking about it yesterday. We had 4 acres.
Yeah.
And I mowed myself a green, like a chipping green in the backyard. And I would hit golf balls 7 days a week.
Yeah.
Literally all the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, just so many good memories playing in the creek and fishing in the pond next door and all of that stuff. It's sad when those places like leave the family.
That's right. And where Randy here is having all of those feelings, including I just want to set this house on fire and burn it to the ground, which is not part of what I was experiencing. And so, boy, this is heavy.
Mm-hmm. It is. Yeah, it was a heavy book. I was not expecting that.
So we get into issue 4, and Randy is still just walking through these mostly empty rooms of his childhood home. And, you reviewed this from the paperback novel. I actually downloaded this from the app called Hoopla through the Central Arkansas Library System. And so on the digital version that I was reading, this is page 87. I'd like you to try and find this.
I don't think I have page numbers.
No, you probably don't. And it probably wouldn't line up.
We're in, which volume are we in?
We're in issue number 4 at this point.
So this is part 3 for me, right?
That's right. It would be Brother's Conscience part 3.
Okay.
And by the way, I grabbed a screenshot of this page, and I'm going to put it up on our Instagram channel along with a couple of other images from this book so you get a sense of the art. But Randy is sitting in this armchair, and there are 4. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't give you a chance to see it.
Yeah. No, Trevel's got me covered.
You've got 4 horizontal panels that go the width of the page stacked on top of each other. And the first one is pulled out a little bit. You think about your camera lens being
zoom in progressively as you go down the page.
Each one zooms in a little bit closer on Randy, sitting in this armchair, and he's wrestling with his feelings. And this is a page where we see transformation in Randy. And there is, I mentioned the rise and the fall. We're going to see this transformation here, and we're going to see the inverse of it later on in issue 6. And I can't wait to point that out to you. But you have just one text box with just a couple of words in each of these panels. The first one says, hope fades. The second, memory fades. The third one says, all that remains, and it's got no lips. And then in the fourth one, which is a real close-up on Randy, it says, is anger. And this is a turning point in the story.
Yeah, for sure. I just thought it was dark.
It was, for sure. But what a cool way to see that visually. Oh, there are a lot of things when you really think about the way this stuff is displayed in a comic that you could think about similarities to how a movie director would do this.
For sure.
And
so these boxes that are shaded in pink or lavender or whatever color this is, it took me a little while to figure out that these were like, it's almost like reading a script, right? Nobody's saying, this is telling you what's happening right here. So again, you make a good point about a movie. This is like watching a movie scene.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's dramatic music in the background.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes the way you'll see this, the narrator here that we have in these salmon color boxes or pink boxes is like in a novel, your omniscient narrator who's just telling the story. Sometimes in comics, the narrator that you see in these boxes is like a firsthand account from either the hero or the villain. And sometimes you get shifting perspective, and a lot of times when that's done, either the color of the text box or the shape of the text box, or like in superheroes, like if it's Spider-Man, you might see like a little spider in the corner, and it might be red, so you know that these are the thoughts of Spider-Man.
Oh, it's like a red letter Bible, huh?
It is. Yeah. All right. These are the holy words of Chris Condon on the page. Bless you, Chris. Thank you. All right. From here, Randy gets up out of his chair and he continues this sort of tour through his home, and he gets angrier, and eventually he finds a gun. And when he does, he goes to a bar, and this is getting now to the very end of issue number 4. He goes to a bar and he sits down and he orders a shot and a beer. And they lay the shot in front of him. And about the time that he's starting to think about taking this drink, Fred, the cowboy who had been in his hotel room, comes in and just sits down a few seats away from him on a stool at the bar. And
Almost like he knew he was there.
Almost like he knew he was there. That's right. And Randy takes a drink. So this gets us now into issue number 5. And what an opening to issue number 5.
Can we talk about the red?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so that was another thing that I picked up on, I don't know, fairly early. I don't remember when it started, but basically the illustrations are shaded like you're looking through red stained glass or rose colored glasses, if you will. And that to me signifies like something bad, anger, danger, something bad's about to happen. Or
Yep.
every time the pages have been read.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad you picked up on that. Usually when we say rose-colored glasses, you're giving
That's right.
a more cheery or cheery interpretation. No, here
This is blood. This is that Texas blood.
This is like looking through blood.
Yep.
That's 100%. Jacob Phillips, in addition to the work that he does as an illustrator, for the books in the last like maybe 4 years or so, maybe a little earlier than that, that Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips put out, Jacob Phillips is the color artist on that. And he knows how to use color just to tell the story too.
Yeah.
So we get into issue number 5.
Lots of red.
Yeah, that's right. Randy is having a dream, and the first page is completely red, and he thinks that he is drowning in his dream in what appears to just be blood.
Yeah.
But we turn to a next page, and we've got 3 side-by-side panels that are close up on Randy's face. And in the first one, he's asleep. And in the second one, he's just waking up and he's looking confused. And in the third one, he is startled, has a look of panic.
So
and
the strike of fear.
Yes.
That's a pretty good description of that face.
The strike of fear at a memory lost.
Yeah.
And at that moment, the bottom panel of the page, which takes up the whole width of the page and is about the same size as those 3 panels above it combined. Now we've pulled out a little bit further. Randy is sitting in that same armchair. Looks down, his shirt is covered in blood, and he's holding a gun. And then we turn the page. What do we see when we turn the page here?
Well,
I guess it's not a page
mine,
turn.
it's not a page turn, but in any case, turns out it was a bad day for Fred.
Yeah, the camera pans back out a little further into this living room, and there's Fred in a puddle of blood. And Randy's response at this point is...
Wait, where are we? We just went from the bar
Mhm.
to a shot. He took a shot.
Took a shot.
Now we're at his house?
We're waking up the next morning. Yeah.
At his house.
At his house, right.
So Fred's gone to Randy's house with him somehow or another.
Yeah, whether by force
Right.
or
We
by
don't know.
influence. Yeah.
Okay.
But either way, we've ended up there, and Fred, for all appearances, is dead on the floor in the living room in a pool of his own blood.
Mm.
And Randy's response to this is just to drag the body across the floor, open up the cellar door, and push the body down the stairs into the basement.
There's an interesting moment right here where Randy, he throws the gun down, and then he looks down at the body, and we're back to these pink boxes where this is like maybe his thoughts or at this point, or
Okay.
and he says to himself, "You're just an animal."
Yes.
And
Yeah.
It's like we're back to that. There's no way to get around it. If I'm in Ambrose County, Texas, this is just who I am.
Yeah. That's exactly right. There's never any escape from this.
Right.
As we start to see some of these panels, first when Randy realizes what he's done, but then as he's starting to clean up the mess, and then there's a point, and I don't want to get into this part of the story very much about his girlfriend, showing up there at the door, but you see his eyes are all red all around them, and he looks feral at this point.
Yeah.
I wrote in my notes that it reminded me of Jack Nicholson in The Shining.
Yeah, I see that. No.
When he's finally turned. But the other thing it reminded me of, here's another Coen Brothers movie reference. Their first movie was a movie called Blood Simple. It was set in like a West Texas setting as well. And that term, Blood Simple, was taken from, I love noir, crime noir fiction. Dashiell Hammett, who wrote The Maltese Falcon, did a book called Red Harvest, which is awesome. It is an awesome crime noir book. But there's a point in that where the Continental operative, the detective in that story, talks about being in this town that was just violent everywhere. Eventually, he felt like he had turned blood simple. And that's the feral experience that Randy is having right now. About this time, and we haven't gone into detail about this, but interspersed in here, we're seeing pages with Joe Bob, and he's putting the thing together. He and one of his deputies, Deputy Flores, right? And she and he are talking some about this mystery and how it's unfolding, and eventually, through their conversation, they come to realize Sarah is our killer. It's not the guy that was assumed to be all along.
Right.
And we got to let Randy know this. We start now. Let's go to we have some more dark stuff at the end of issue 5, including Randy realizing that Fred was not dead and then strangling him to death and finishing off the job.
I think I missed that somehow. Where's that?
This is at the end of issue 5.
Yeah, I see it. Oh, yeah, he goes down to the basement.
And when he's down there, he sees a fixed patch of drywall on the wall, and he opens it up, and he realizes there's the money that Travis had stolen.
That's how you know it's a crime family if there's money in the wall.
That's usually a good indication.
100% fact. You got money in the wall, you've been doing something you're not supposed to do.
Last chapter of our story, we're going to open up, and by the way, all those things where Randy is strangling the man, all in red.
Yeah, all in red, that's right.
Just like you pointed out.
And then the last page is just red.
Yes.
There's several, just red.
That's right, a whole page with nothing else but the color.
Yeah.
We get to the beginning of the last issue, and Sarah is now at Randy's house, and she's basically giving him the, why don't we just run away from this town? And she wants to tell him that she is the one who committed this crime, but she can't bring herself to do it. She's not strong enough. And eventually, and she's trying to warn him, too, don't go out and kill Kuttner. Don't do something that you're going to regret later. Of course, part of that is because she knows he's not guilty in this crime. Yeah, true. But either way, there is no way that Randy's going to hear this. So this takes up most of the last issue. And in the meantime, Joe Bob and Deputy Flores have picked up Sarah, and they've taken her off to prison because they've solved this murder. But Randy, still not knowing this, he's dressed himself back up in the suit that he was wearing when he was in Los Angeles, probably. He's walking just down the center of the street in town, and he's carrying a plastic bag full of just cash.
That's how you know it's a small town. Yeah. Right? There's no traffic. You can just walk down the middle of the road.
That's right. And in this particular manner, where he's got in his left hand this bag of cash, and in his right hand a pistol. He's not concealing this thing. It's just in his hand.
No.
And he walks up to...
I'd say at this point he has poor intentions.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
He has malintentions, for sure. He walks up to this bar, which is called the Lost Soul of Vault.
Yeah.
And we'd learned earlier that
nice touch.
That's where Kuttner and his gang hang out. And he peeks in the window and he sees Kuttner's in there shooting pool. And then we've got a page that shows Randy walking into the bar.
I like this flashback right here.
Oh, talk about it then.
So we go immediately, he sees Kuttner shooting pool in there, and then we go next page. It's a page turn for me. We go to what appears to be Randy. Looks like he's had a bike wreck. He skinned his knee. It looks now there's some bigger kids, would appear to me to be Travis, being bullied by Kuttner.
Yep.
So we're flashing back to this scene where Kuttner is, they're teenagers, right? And this dude's already in crime. And so he's bullying Randy and his big brother Travis.
Yep.
So you see kid Randy angry with tears streaming down his face. And then the next panel, adult angry. Randy angry, about to walk in the door to the bar.
Yeah, that's right. All that weight of history is flooded back on him.
Yeah.
And he's walking into the bar, and then turn the page in the book in front of you.
Yeah.
This is called
off the rails.
Yeah. This is called a double page spread.
Double page spread.
And so just imagine we're looking at the outside of the bar from the street from an overhead angle. Like they've got a drone taking this image. And in those big comic book letters as well, just blam, blam, blam.
And everything's shaded red.
Yes. So now turn the page again.
Yep.
This is the page that I think is in parallel with the one where Randy was sitting in the chair in his house and turning to anger, because we see the reverse. So we've got these 4 panoramic type panels that go across the page, all equal size.
And they're identical except for what Randy's doing.
That's right. First one is just showing the closed door of the Lost Soul bar. Second one, Randy has opened the door and he's peeking out. Third one, he's walking out to the curb. And the fourth, he's just sitting down on the curb with his head in his hands.
Yeah.
And it's all that tension that had built up has been let out, and he doesn't have to be angry anymore. And now he can just crumble.
Yeah, yeah.
as we get this other little turn that kind of reminded me of the end of Reservoir Dogs when Steve Buscemi's character had gone into hiding after everybody else dies and then runs off. But
I love Steve Buscemi.
I do too.
Yeah.
So we look inside the bar and everybody is dead and bloody all over the place, except this one sort of squirrely looking cowboy comes out of the men's room.
Yeah.
He'd been in the right place at the right time. He grabs up that bag of money that's got blood all over it and runs out the back door. About this time, Sheriff Joe Bob pulls up, arrests. Randy isn't fighting this. He's accepted his fate at this point. But he also learns as they're going back to the sheriff's office, that why is Sarah here?
Yeah.
And Joe Bob's telling him she confessed to killing your brother, and he can't even believe it. We've got this little interlude scene that follows after that I thought was maybe going to be something that led into the next volume of the story, because we meet another character that we hadn't before. This squirrely guy who has had the bag of money goes, and now we meet the boss behind the boss, because he's sitting in the office at it says the Pool King, the West Texas Above Ground Pool King.
He looks like Fred to me.
Yeah,
with the big chops.
Yeah, he's got the big pork chop sideburns. This character I almost hate to make this comparison, but maybe it was just his white suit reminded me of Boss Hogg.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was just thinking.
Okay,
yeah.
But not goofy like Boss Hogg from the Dukes of Hazzard.
No, this is like the main kingpin guy here. That's the way I see it.
That's right. And the squirrely guy thinks, this is my chance to move up in the
right.
Kuttner's gone, Travis is gone. He's asking, hey, let me fill that gap that's left in your operation now. And the boss gives him this little speech about, you think you can just walk in here and do this? And he pulls out a gun and just shoots the guy in the head.
And takes his bag of money.
It takes his bag of money back. That's right. Last thing we get in the whole story, Randy is being taken off to prison. And he's sitting in the back of the patrol car and being carted away with Sarah sitting there at his side as well. And we've got this narration that takes us out. And it says, the memories flooded like a dam break. And the words came back to haunt him. Feelings, wishes, dreams, all just itching at the base of his skull, gnawing like caged rodents. He used to dream of it sometimes, but not anymore. He no longer had to dream. He was home now, never to leave again. Home. Which is really also the conclusion to issue number 2 as well. And then we get the very last page of the whole thing, and it's just this purple early dawn light of a rural West Texas landscape. Holy cow.
Yeah.
What did you think?
It was darker than I expected it was going to be, for sure.
Yeah. Did you enjoy it overall?
Yeah. I'm sure someone has said this before. This can't be original to me. I read a 30-minute adult cartoon episode.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure. I mean, what's great is you can get through this book in about, 3 hours maybe?
Oh, it was less than that for me. I read very slowly, which is why I don't read much. Probably took me an hour.
Okay.
I would guess. I did it in 2 settings. One, there were people around and stuff going on, and so I didn't last very long. Then the second time I just sat down and read. I think I read part 1 or whatever first, and then I read the last 5 parts all at once.
Well, that worked out then.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, that was what I came away with. Is I just read a cartoon episode.
Yeah.
Right? Or it doesn't have to be cartoon. I'm associating it with cartoons because it's a comic book and it's illustrated, or I just read a 45-minute episode from some Netflix drama.
Or you read a movie.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it felt short to me.
Okay.
Right. There wasn't a lot of expanding on much of the storyline. Yeah. We saw some stuff in pictures, but it didn't go into a lot of depth. There was some development with Randy for sure. And so it was just darker than I thought it was going to be. And the ending was like, oh man, I thought there might be some redemption here, but there wasn't really.
Not in that Texas blood.
No, but it was a good first experience.
Well, good.
Yeah.
Man, thank you for doing this with me.
Absolutely.
I've had a lot of fun today. Thank you for reviewing this story. Thank you to Travell for being here with us again.
But,
man, what do you think? We going to have you back sometime?
You said there were more volumes of this, right?
You want to do this?
I'm in, yeah.
Awesome.
I'm in.
All right, put it down. We'll mark it, and we'll make this happen. And everybody, thank you for listening. This has been the Graphic Novel Apostle Podcast, and we will see you back here next time.